So we will get going. I would like to welcome everybody this fine morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you happen to be. I'm Sarah Grimm from the Wisconsin Historical Society and would like to welcome you to today's webinar. Let me get that slide up so we can all see, where we will be looking at some of what's going on in digital preservation with a little bit of a broader perspective this time. This is our last CoSA-Preservica webinar series, and thank you very much to all of you who have attended throughout our series, and welcome to those of you who may just be joining us for the first time. All of these webinars have been recorded, so if you see something here on this list that interests you or that you'd like to hear again, please feel free to access those at the PERTS portal, and the web address is at the bottom of the screen there. We will be recording this webinar as well for those who want to see it at a later date and for those who couldn't make it today. But as we go through, please feel free to enter any questions that you may have for our speakers in the chat box, and we will save them. We'll have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. There we go. For today, I am so pleased to welcome our two distinguished guests who are joining us at the end of their days from the other side of the world. Our first guest, David Giaretta, is the Director of Primary Trustworthy Digital Authorization Body, Ltd., PTAB, which is the first organization in the world to be accredited for ISO 16363, which is audit and certification. David has a long history of helping to construct the world in which many of us on this call now live. He has chaired the ISO panel, which wrote the original OIIS standard, which is now has been adopted as the de facto standard for building digital archives. And David also leads the group which produced the ISO standards for audit and certification of digital repositories, and the PTAB group, which provides training for auditors and repository managers. And we were just talking about this, he's worked on a number of fascinating scientific projects, not the least of which is his work on a number of astronomical satellites as the UK resident astronomer for IUE and the calibration lead in the USA for the Faint Object Camera of the Hubble Telescope. Our second illustrious guest, Tamara Thornhill, is the corporate archivist at Transport for London, and she has over 10 years experience working in archives and records management roles and is currently in the position of the corporate archives manager at Transport for London. Tamara is a firm believer that archives should be accessible and used, and if they're not, why are we keeping things, as we all say frequently. She also believes that archivists need to be as proactive as possible in the capture and preservation of the materials. And in the modern world, this increasingly means addressing both the born digital and the digitized materials. And in an organization as large and complex as Transport for London, the challenges involved in this are numerous, but the risks of doing nothing are enormous. David Portman from Preservica is also here with us, so welcome, David.
Hi, everybody.
He and I are just going to sit back and let our speakers share their wisdom and experience with us, and we'll be joining you again at the end. So, David, I am going to turn this over to you.
Oh, it's me first. Okay.
You are first. Yes. Okay. Changing. And you should be ready to roll.
Okay. Oh, so thank you very much for the invitation to give this talk. I guess this talk is going to vary from being very broad to fairly specific, and it's about digital preservation. And I was trying to give some hints about some questions to ask repository managers, questions to ask, and also the checks that can be made on the systems that you have. And the underlying question is, will your digital holdings survive? So I'll give just a broad overview of, or rather ask some what I hope might be provocative questions about digital preservation, think about the threats, the different types of objects we are challenged to preserve, and then I'll move on to the standards area. That'll be the bulk of my talk. And I'll end up with some information about certification and the costs and the benefits of going that route. And I'll try and stick to my time. But I'll just check my watch. Okay.
David, could you lean closer to your mic, please?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Way better.
So digital preservation. There are all sorts of ways of addressing this, but you could think about this as keeping the bits unchanged, or converting from one format to the next as you go through. Many systems do that sort of thing. Is success measured by just being able to render, that is, just display it, listen to it, and so forth, the same in the future as you do now? Has it anything to do with being able to provide the bits to the user in 10 seconds or 10 milliseconds? How about a nice website? Those last two, they have some importance, but I would argue that in the context of digital preservation, it's certainly true that in the end, usability is the key. But things like the speed and the how pretty things look are not things that the standards like OAIS concern themselves with, because those sort of things change over time. And what we're interested in is the things that are being preserved. So we can think about, and I'm taking a guess here that most of the folks here might be interested in preserving documents, Word, PDF, and so forth, videos, or audiovisual, those sorts of things. But I've done some work with a number of archives, and what's coming down the line is what may be the most challenging thing. So many publications now are really quite complex. Even Word, it has been for a long time, but increasingly it's really a container for either links to or actual spreadsheets, databases. Of course, there are ActiveX components in there that are really not things that are amenable to simple printing or rendering. And of course, engineering designs, I guess you might hear about that in the next talk. My background is scientific data, done a lot of work with CERN, astronomy, and of course talked with lots of people about genomics. There's finance data, pretty important in the world today. Websites, and of course they can have embedded applications, or they can have content management systems behind them. And of course there are massively distributed data systems, even globally interconnected, linked data systems, which are really quite significant in the world today. And those are things that it seems to me may be coming down the line, so I will be interested to hear if people think that they're not in their purview in the near future. So what we, hold on, but especially, well, these sort of things, they're really not, what would be success in preservation? If in 50 years' time you can just print the numbers or the text, would that be preservation? I think not. So what I've been involved with is OEIS with a very broad view. I've worked with a lot of different types of repositories, people with different backgrounds, and we tried to come at it from a fairly abstract point of view. And the definition there has many terms which have their own in-depth definitions. Information is defined very broadly, independently understandable, scientific data, audiovisual documents, they all have their own context there. and the important definition of designated community, which we'll come back to, with evidence supporting authenticity over the long term. Well, long term, now many of the audience here may think that their repositories will exist till the end of the Republic or some term like that. Well, that would be great. But those working in the digital world, they often tend to be more projects with relatively short-term funding. And so the long-term could be the indefinite future, but it also may be just that repository's role in a chain of preservation. Now, many people, and I've seen this, think that conformance to OEIS just means mapping to the functional model or the various workflows that are in there. But really, that's not what OEIS talks about in terms of conformance. It's really the information model and the mandatory responsibilities. So I hope this isn't unfamiliar to you. Now, in terms of the information model, OEIS basically defines various sorts of things, sorts of information that really need to surround the data object. And there are things like representation information and the preservation description information. And all of those things together make up what OEIS has a sort of shorthand term for, which is the archival information package. Now, many of you will probably, and I realize I'm in a Preservica talk, but let me be a little bit controversial and say that there are many systems out there that I know that say that they have archival information packages and they fulfill the OEIS information model. I know that I must confess I do not know about the Preservica system in that detail, but some of you may know the eArc, so-called OEIS archival information package, and I think there are certainly problems with them. So one of the questions which a repository really needs to ask is that if their system, they may have purchased a software system that claims to do preservation, it claims to have an archival information package, does it really? Can you, the key thing is, can you point to the all of the components of the preservation description information and all of the different sorts of representation information? These are key questions that need to be asked, and you do not need to be constrained by what the software calls an archival information package. And it's quite easy, as I'll describe in a moment, to add things to that definition of what the software gives you. So the other aspect is, the other part of conformance are the mandatory responsibilities. So I won't go through these in details, but essentially it's talking about being in control about what comes into the archive, being able to do things in a legal fashion, to do preservation, to define a designated community, make the information independently understandable to that designated community, preserve against all reasonable contingencies, including, by the way, the demise of the archive or the archive system, and then, of course, make the information available to the designated community with evidence supporting its that information's authenticity. So those are in brief, are the mandatory responsibilities, and those two slides sort of sum up the conformance to OEIS, and that goes into the 16363. But if we've looked at, my colleagues and I have looked at many repositories, and there are some interesting, very common problems. And one can think about risks to the bits. Of course, most repositories can look after the bits fairly well, but there are various strategies out there, multiple copies, disaster recovery, recovery plans, etc. But there are very often, how can I put it, holes in their plans, sometimes fairly obvious, sometimes fairly subtle. There's often just not enough representation information. There's a kind of assumption about things. Things are left fuzzy, whereas really one needs to be quite clear about what one is doing. And in the most instances that we've seen, it's relatively straightforward to fix this, because there's a lot that's in the hands of the repository managers. And of course, one does not need to have every piece of representation information, just enough for the designated community. And just a third brief touching on a common problem is basically not having the archival information package adequately defined. And again, the solution is just to read what's necessary. And in fact, it turns out that most repositories we look at, the ones that are, most repositories is actually doing a very good job, but they just haven't clearly defined what they're doing and where everything is. And sometimes, as I say, they rely on what the software suppliers say are archival information packages, but they should really check very carefully whether that's true. Now, the standards I've been involved with are OEIS, the fundamental standard. That leads fairly directly into ISO 16363. And along the way, we produced a document called, that was published as TRAC, Trustworthy Repository Audit Checklist. Actually, the interesting story is that should never have been really published in that way. It was a kind of an accident that it was published independently. But we took that and made the full ISO standard, but then we needed to be able to audit. So that's where I'm coming towards the audit side. And the fundamental standard there is ISO 17021, which defines basically the process for doing a good international standards-based audit. And what we needed to do then is to write another standard, ISO 16919, which basically just tweaks some of the requirements in 17021 and allows one to define who should be able to do audits and provide certification under 16363. And all of that together allows one to have a certification system that lies within the overarching ISO system. Now, and of course, the important point is to have auditors who are accredited within that system. So, and I'll come on to that again in a moment, but the ISO 16363 has a lot of metrics, 120, but they are arranged hierarchically. So when you look at them, there are not actually that many, because the way we did it was to say, well, we cannot define everything that needs to be looked at. So we can have a number of broad topics that an auditor needs to check, but actually, well, there are probably a few specific points within that broad topic that the auditor really needs to look at. So that's why we ended up with 120 metrics. But the three areas are the organizational infrastructure. So really, do you think you have enough staff? Well, of course, the answer is no, but do you have kind of enough staff? Are you going to be able to do what you need to do? Do you have enough commitment in the organization? And do you have enough financial stability? So that does not mean that you have funding forever, but you have enough. So all of these things are a matter of judgment and depend upon the auditor, but I think there's a reasonable definition, a reasonable way of looking at these things. Digital object management, that's the OAIS kind of thing, and then there's the general risk aspects that one needs to think about. So a trustworthy repository needs to meet, again, it does not have to be perfect, but they have to, in general terms, meet all of these requirements adequately. And it's the auditors who make that judgment, look at the evidence, and the ISO 17021 makes sure that that audit and those decisions are made in a way which I think everybody would agree would be in the best possible practice of doing things. So the 16363 guides the auditor into making judgments. Remember the hierarchical set of metrics. It's fully integrated into the ISO audit process because it links to the 16919, which specializes 17021, and it's a process of continuous improvement. So the importance of accreditation is that, well, I was looking recently, and you may have seen quite a bit of press about Vint Cerf talking about the coming of the digital dark age. And the direction I'm coming from is that very much of what we depend on in terms of, well, just to pick a few at random, food, environment, energy, there's ISO certification that underpins a lot of these things. And that's the sort of rock on which we're trying to base what we're doing in terms of identifying trustworthy repositories. OAIS is the fundamental one. 16363 picks up the specific things that need to be looked at, and as was mentioned in the introduction, PTAB, the organization that I lead, is the first in the world to receive accreditation for doing these audits and providing certification. I imagine that there will be more coming down the line being able to do this, but we're at the moment authorized to, and will continue to be accredited in order to provide audits and certification worldwide, because it is a worldwide system. And that's the very power of ISO, the international agreements, the consistency amongst the different accreditation bodies. That's what makes ISO so powerful. So just something I'm often asked is that, well, isn't it too hard to do 16363? I think the answer is, well, if you want to wait until you're perfect, then first of all, you probably will not become perfect without having some external advice about things, but also perfection is not actually necessary. You need to be good enough, because this is a cyclical process that continues to look at what your repository is doing, and it's divided into a number of phases, well, into two phases. The first phase identifies the larger non-conformances, and then there's time to fix that before the second phase, which is a visit from the auditors, quite a short visit, and the point is that perfection is not needed. So the costs and the benefits, well, we've done a number of test audits, and there's certainly, even with good repositories, there's a certain amount of effort needed to prepare for the audits, because documents are kind of around, but you need to gather them together. There are some problems, as I've indicated, that need to be fixed. But once that's been done, then that does not tend to need to be done time and again. So it's a one-off cost largely. How much would it be? Well, of course, there will be other organizations doing audits, but if you think about a 27,000 audit, there's an average cost of about 10,000 a year, which sounds, well, depends on the size of your repository. If you're spending 100 times that, then it's going to be 1% or that sort of amount. And if you are doing things wrong, then the risks are quite large. Now we've been if you think about the different phases, then for example, you can initiate phase 1, for example, at quite a small registration fee to find out what the main issues are before starting phase 2 when you're ready and when funds are available. Now, the benefits, of course, are having an internationally recognized certification that's globally recognized, using third-party independent evaluations, and of course this is a process for continuous improvement, which I think is, perfection is not needed, but it's something one can aim, one can head for. So I'll stop there. I hope I haven't overrun my time, but and I'll hand on to the next speaker. And I guess we'll have time for questions later on. So I'll hand over to you, Tamara.
Thank you, David. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you're a little bit quiet.
Okay, I'll speak up. And,
oh, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, better? Excellent. Okay.
Oh, I hope you don't have to skip through all of my backup slides. Oh, I thought these would be available for download.
It's okay, we will. Here we go.
I'm afraid there are a fair number of them. Ah, okay, good.
There we go. Excellent. Okay, so yeah, I'm Tamara Thornhill, and I'm the Corporate Archives Manager for Transport for London. I'm here today basically to sort of express some solidarity in the world of digital records with those of you who may be struggling with some of the issues. Provide a little bit of reassurance that progress can be made, and perhaps the key is working out what progress looks like to you. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of solutions that we've employed and why we've employed them, but I'm very much focusing on the idea that the digital records world provides lots of opportunities, and it's opportunities that you may not necessarily have considered, because I think there's a little bit of a understandable trap sometimes that we fall into in our profession, where we think of the digital scares us a little bit, and therefore we tend to treat it in isolation, and my argument would be that a lot of the time that's not necessarily how we should approach it. I'm going to start off just by giving you a bit of context to the organisation within for which the Corporate Archives exists. the organisation we are a service for. I'm giving you this not just because it's of interest to you, but because I think we are a very large organisation and a very complex organisation, and it's really necessary to have a little bit of an understanding of that in order to kind of grasp the issues that we do deal with and face in the digital world. So Transport for London is responsible for London's public transport network and main roads. So basically every form of transport, above ground, underground, on the river, in London, is all provided by Transport for London. That's tubes, buses, rivers, taxis, and even down to people walking around. We have a whole section dedicated to promoting walking and cycling and healthy transport. The organisation dates from 2000, but it's actually only the latest incarnation of a public body that dates back to 1933. And then, of course, even before then, the underground line still existed, the buses were still running. So actually, in many ways, we date back to sort of the early 1850s. We today employ around 29,000 employees. So again, if you sort of think of that over the course of the long history that we've got, that's an awful lot of employees, an awful lot of ancestors who have an interest in the company. We operate across over 300 different sites. We operate with a budget of in excess of £11 billion. I'd love to say that even 1 billion of that came to the archive, but of course it really doesn't. We're sort of way down in the bottom part of the zeros. And we are an organisation that is internationally renowned, internationally respected. We deal with an awful lot of data. 31 million customer journeys are made, 8.2 million contacts in the customer database. And I put in there at the bottom the bit about the 2012 Olympics bid. I think this is important for two reasons. So the London Olympics 2012, when the original bid was put together, it basically sold itself on two key facts. One was that we were going to inspire a generation, which we're actually doing a reasonably good job at. And the second was that it was going to be the public transport games. The idea was that as few people as possible were going, and this includes athletes and officials, were going to attend the games on any other by any other method other than public transport. That's how integral transport is to London. And I'll come back later to why the Olympics bid and the Olympics material is actually integral to the digital preservation work and the whole package that we're doing around digital records in the archive service. So that's the organisation. We're here to, TFL has a tagline that every journey matters. So the corporate archive service basically is here to evidence how every journey matters, to prove that it does, why we've decided that that journey should happen. We support research and teaching by making the collections available and encouraging their use. We provide information services which support employees in their duties, so that's to help them stop sort of reinventing the wheel, maybe save some money. We're about promoting knowledge and understanding of the organisation's history, programmes and goals. So we're here for both the business and the public, and very importantly, we're here to help the organisation comply with its freedom of information obligation, which is a legal obligation, and the mayoral transparency agenda. So that's all about the organisation being as open as possible, being as auditable as possible. And those two elements are really key for us in kind of selling the idea of a digital preservation solution. How can we be transparent? How can we comply with freedom of information if nobody can find anything, if nobody can access anything? So that's who we are. The records themselves, these obviously are digitised versions of paper records. in terms of paper, we've got in excess of 19,400 boxes worth of material. That equates to roughly 156,000 files and items. In that, you've got your sort of standard, I suppose, business archive content, you know, minutes of meetings, financial papers, all the supporting documentation that goes around that. But there's an awful lot more as well. Just on the screen in front of you, we've got some letters there which are about terrorist attacks. We've got bus design blueprints. We've got event planning organisation. We've got funding. We've got property records. We've got maps. So it's communications, art and architecture, social history. You know, I'm constantly amazed at the questions that people ask us, hoping to find an answer to in the collection. But I'm even more amazed that generally we always have something to help them. And believe me, sometimes they are very, very obscure inquiries. So that's the physical world. And in the physical world, we have a pretty robust system and pretty robust processes in place for capturing material, identifying material. I'd love to say the same is true in the digital world, but it's really not. It's something we're working towards, but it's not there yet. But of course, all of this sort of these types of information that are contained within the physical records are still being created. They're being created in the digital environment in TFL. And so the next slide I'm going to put up is just giving you an introduction really into the horror that is the digital world in which that exists in TFL. So there's some really quite frightening numbers on that slide. You know, there's over 2,500 shared network drives, over 120 million plus files on these network drives. There's no automated deletion rules. Some of the various document management systems have some rudimentary records management facilities built into them, but mainly they don't. And we're compounding the problem by deploying more and more mobile devices using different apps and again more and more systems on them. And of course, the other thing that digital brings with it is the plethora of formats. You know, in the physical world, we're generally dealing with sort of paper, parchment, rice paper, photocopy paper, vellum, and some objects. In the digital world, we're dealing with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, CAD, TIFF, websites, databases, you know, everything that David was talking about previously, basically. And then we're dealing with all the different versions of them as well. So it's really quite a frightening picture in a way. And this environment within which we are as a service are meant to be operating, it makes it very hard for us to identify material and to acquire it. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And it also means, you know, there is another element to the archive service that I didn't cover there, and that's managing the material. And in terms of managing material, that's something that really we should be able to do. And so that's sort of the conclusion that we came to. We were in many ways burying our heads in the sand. And then 2012 happened, and all of these digital records around 2012 got very carefully bundled up into a package, and the corporate archives were contacted and asked if we would like custody of them. And of course we said yes. But that was the point at which we realised that actually we have to actively do something about this. We have to actively work out a way of trying to manage these records, and then we need to start looking at how we're going to capture material, how are we going to identify it in the first place. So what's digital archives for us now looks like in terms of quantitative is, overall, that's not a huge amount of material given, but when you consider that that's been amassed in literally just 5 years, and it took us over 150 years to amass 155,000 physical files, paper files, suddenly that does seem a bit of a bigger battle that we're fighting. And that 181,000 digital files, that's a figure I would urge you all to try and work out. Try and work out just how many files you're dealing with in a digital context, so that you can compare that to just how many files you're dealing with in a physical world. I find that a really useful comparative figure to give to my senior management. It helps them to understand very quickly just what a battle we face. So as I say, we have been identifying material, we have been capturing material. I'm not going to here take you through kind of the methods and the processes by which we've done that. I'm very happy to answer questions on that at the end, or alternatively, if you'd like to email me, I'm happy to have a conversation sort of later on about that. That's not a problem. What I wanted to look at a little bit was the management side of it. Why did we decide to take Preservica as our solution, and why did we decide to use Amazon Web Services as our solution? Essentially, it comes down to our in-house IT setup. The TfL IT service exists in a world of the now. They're very focused on operational commitments. So they have to provide, all the platforms. That means, for example, the tubes can run 24 hours a day. That means that everything is as smooth and efficient as possible. They are very good at providing bespoke platforms that make this happen. They are very good at working with external providers and software companies to customize very heavily different applications to enable the operational side of things to run. Anything else that comes outside of that is very much a secondary concern. So that means that you're not getting the expertise around it. It means you're not necessarily getting the support around it either. The other thing that happens with everything that comes outside of the operational sphere is that because it's a secondary concern, it takes a very long time to actually get anything deployed on the estate. It also takes a very long time to get anything upgraded. And if you do want anything upgrading, it has to go through numerous isolation areas and user-end testing areas, because obviously they do not want any nasties, for want of a better expression, finding their way onto the TfL IT estate. And so that ends up taking a lot of time and a lot of money. We didn't want to be in that scenario with any digital management and any digital preservation solution that we chose. Digital preservation is actually, it has the potential to be quite a fast-moving environment, and we can't be hanging around waiting for the latest upgrade to be deployed. We need to have that solution at our fingertips quite quickly. So we decided to take things out of the hands of our IT estate. We went with cloud storage. We went with Preservica as our solution, and we went with the cloud storage as the storage option. There are, the main reasons I've already explained. There are secondary reasons that are on the slide in front of you. Very important ones for us at the bottom is the option for the different tiered storage. As I said, already we've got 181,000 files. Let's be realistic. There's only a very, very tiny percentage of those that are ever going to be accessed on a frequent basis. So what's the point in paying for premium storage for most of them? They may as well go in the lower grade. We also needed a system, a platform that enabled us to operate various permission controls. We've got material that is going to be accessible to everybody. We've got material that is going to be accessible only to people within the business. And we've got material that's only going to be accessible to certain people within the business. So we needed to make sure that we had that flexibility on the permission controls. We also needed something that was going to enable us to work on our exhibitions, because we do quite a lot of exhibitions. So we like the idea of being able to virtually pull material together in an intellectual sense without it actually affecting the sort of hierarchy and where it fits within the classification scheme behind the scenes. So that's what we went for. Where we are at the moment is, in all honesty, we do not have an awful lot of our material in the cloud. That's because we're doing what David suggested, and I'm very pleased he did, which is we are taking our time to make sure that all of our work packages and all of our cataloging standards, etc., and our processes are as robust as they can be. We don't want to be in a situation where we've ingested a lot of material and then we realise that actually we'd quite like to do it differently. So we have to go back and play around with that material that we've got in there and maybe manipulate some of the metadata, or perhaps extract it and then put it back in a different way. We'd like to, as much as possible, get it right from the start. And I'm quite happy for us to be taking our time with this, because I think in the long term it's going to pay off. Now, as part of this, we've discovered some sort of nice opportunities in the world of digital records. The biggest one of these for us, I think, is probably the fact that it's given us the reason, really, the excuse to actually stand back and look properly at our metadata. And this is our metadata across the board for both physical records and digital records. What we've done is we've looked at every single field, metadata field that we're currently capturing, but then we've also looked at the various fields used by ISEG, by Dublin Core, by Premise, by MET. We've looked at what the purpose of them is. We've looked at which levels they need to be captured at. And then we started to break it down into, is this administrative metadata, is this preservation metadata, or is it interpretive metadata? So is this metadata that the public needs in order to use and access the material? Is it metadata that the archivists need in order to manage and administer the collection? Or is it metadata that the system needs in order to be able to preserve the digital record? This has been a really, really good opportunity to actually start to just stand back and think properly about why we're capturing certain pieces of information, what we think we're going to do with it, how are we presenting that information to the public. And I think, it's something that archivists we sometimes don't do often enough, is we sort of take on the challenges as they pop up, and we deal with them, and we deal with them very effectively, but we do a lot of the time deal with them in isolation, and it's been really, really valuable to step back and look across the whole board. We've done it with our cataloging standards as well. We're starting to we've sort of really stripped them out quite a lot, actually. and it's made it much easier for us to use volunteers to catalogue material, for example. And then the other really good opportunity that the digital records world has presented for us is awareness. It is really, embarking on down the digital preservation route with Preservica and actually starting to go out and engage with people about what digital records they're creating. It's really raising the profile of the service, both internally and externally. So externally, we've had a lot of good publicity. We've been asked to give sort of presentations and things. And then internally, what we're noticing is that areas of the business that we were finding it hard to establish a communication channel with are actually coming to us now, and they're coming to us and they're saying, well, what material have you already got that relates to us? Or they're saying, oh, I've got this stuff sitting in my shared drive, would you be interested in it? Or, even more brilliantly, they're starting to think about the material that they're creating that is not necessarily of archival value, but relates to an asset. So I'm thinking, for example, of an escalator that is in a station, and that escalator is going to be in place for 70 years. All the records relating to that escalator don't have any historical significance as far as the corporate archives are concerned, but they need to be in place for the 70 years that that escalator will probably be in service. And this person who is in control of these records is sitting there thinking, well, sometimes I can't open my Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. How on earth am I going to open this CAD file in 20 odd years? And it's making them think that they actually need to be doing something more widely within the business. And we are starting to look at possibly deploying our Preservica solution as more of a records management solution because of that migration aspect to it. So that was just sort of a really quick whiz through. As I said, I'm very happy to take any questions. I'm very happy to take the conversation offline at a later date if anybody wants to get in touch with me. But just some quick takeaways for you. In the world of digital records, always try and work out how much data you actually have and break it down as much as you can. Think about what your projected growth is, and that will help you work out your storage criteria, possibly save you some money. Think about what your security concerns are. Maybe there aren't any. Think about the IT structure, the IT environment within which you're operating. I mean, your IT service may be brilliant, so therefore, why go outside? Think about who actually needs to access these digital records, why they need to access them, what they need to do with them, how long they need to access them for. Think about the digital environment as an opportunity to address wider archival problems. As I said, maybe it's the excuse you need to look at your overall approach to cataloguing. Maybe it's a good time to come up with a new classification scheme. Maybe it's a good time to look at your conservation and preservation priorities and budgets across the board. And always try and think how any software or any solution you deploy can actually be used more widely within your business or within your institution, because the more people you get on board with your ideas, then the more viable they become. Hope that made some sense for you all and you got something useful out of it.
Superb, thank you, Tamara. So this is David Portman from Preservica. I'd like to say a huge thank you to both David and Tamara, a great wealth of knowledge and experience and best practice shared by both of them today. So thank you guys very much for joining us. So we are going to move on to look at some quick next steps. And then we're going to move to Q&A. So if you do have any questions for David or Tamara, please do use the question or the chat function on the WebEx to send your questions in, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can in the time we've got. So just some quick next steps and resources. The PERTS portal, I'm sure you're aware of it by now, but it's a great resource. The recordings from today will be up in a few days' time, and also, as Sarah mentioned, throughout the whole of this PDP series, the recordings to all of those sessions are available on the PERTS portal, along with a whole host of other resources. Upcoming conferences Preservica will be attending, exhibiting and presenting at, including the CoSA-Nagara conference, which I'm sure you're all attending, coming up in July, so we look forward to seeing you there. And if anyone's attending SAA in Portland, please do drop by, meet the Preservica team and join one of our 2 sessions taking place. We're also hosting our user group at SAA as well, so any Preservica users, we do look forward to seeing you there. Live demo taking place next week. If you want to see Preservica in action, then you can sign up for that, no obligation, and that's a quick 30-minute tour of Preservica's functionality, and also head to our website where there's a whole host of white papers, industry reports, and case studies available for you to peruse and download. Okay, so we're going to move on to some questions now. So it looks like there's a few coming in. So David, this one is for you. So for those organisations which do not have the current funds for an outside audit, would you recommend self-check compliance with the standards?
Oh yes, the 16363 was written very much with that in mind, as with a lot of extra descriptive information. I mean, many standards tend to be quite terse, but 16363 has a lot of extra text, a lot of extra descriptive material, just precisely for that reason, to enable a self-check. And indeed, it is part of the essentially part of the phase 1 that I mentioned of an actual audit. So if a repository does that self-check, then we know I know that many repositories have found that incredibly helpful. And if at some point in the future the repository needs to or is able to move forward to a full audit, then it provides a solid basis for that next step.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, David. Okay, so we are coming up to the hour, so if there's any more questions, please do send them in. If you do leave today's session and you think of a question for either of our speakers today, then just drop myself at Preservica a question on info@preservica.com, and I can pass that on to our speakers. Equally, please do approach Sarah at CoSA with any questions, and we can provide that connection to the speakers.
I'm going to pop in here since I said, Tamara, I was fascinated by your metadata sheet. I know that a lot of us are kind of struggle with all those different aspects of metadata. Where are you on that as far as kind of the progress you've made through your collections and identifying all those?
So we have basically come up with a new set of metadata that we're going to apply to all records that are catalogued from this point onwards.
Nice.
We can't apply it retrospectively because we're just dealing with far too many to apply retrospectively. So we're just going to do it sort of literally from this point forward. What I do have to do is I have to translate that into an XML schema for material that's ingested into Preservica. What we're doing is, so we use the CALM cataloging software, and we're going to keep CALM as basically our master. So the idea is that anybody who is wanting to search the collections will do that via our online CALM catalogue. If it's a digital record, they'll see sort of all the relevant metadata. So all the metadata fields that we've decided are relevant to the public interface, that's what they will see. If it's a digital record, they will also then see a URL link that will take them over to Universal Access, the Preservica Universal Access site, where they will be able to access the digital record and also any relevant technical metadata that we believe is relevant to members of the public. In that CALM catalogue, there will be the metadata that we believe is relevant for the public, the metadata that we believe is relevant for the archivist in order to manage and administer the collections. All of the technical metadata, or virtually all of the technical metadata, is only going to exist in Preservica. That was quite, there was quite a bit of queuing and a bit of dialogue, shall we say, on that one within the team. But we've just sort of decided that there is a clear difference between what an archivist actually needs to know, what a member of the public actually needs to know, and what a piece of preservation software actually needs to know. And if you start putting them all together, you end up with a catalogue record that is mammoth, that is frightening, and actually sort of almost becomes a little bit unusable. So that's why we sort of decided to keep the technical metadata a little bit separate. I am very happy to share the big spreadsheet with anybody who'd like to take a look at it, because, as you said, we're sort of all grappling with it. So I'm happy for anybody to give comments on it, or if it assists anybody else, that's not a problem.
Excellent, thank you. I know a lot of us are working with that access piece right now in the catalog and how they all connect, so you are a step ahead for many of us. All right, any other questions? All right, David and Tamara, thank you so much for taking the time this evening for you guys to spend a little bit of time with us and share what you know, and we greatly appreciate it. And as David said, if you have any other questions, you can contact me or David Portman, and we will make sure that they get answered. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely afternoon for those of us over here, and we will talk to you all very soon.
Thank you, everybody.